I arrived at the edge of the Atchafalaya Basin on a smothering August afternoon. One of those Louisiana days where the air feels thick enough to drink. The wetlands stretched endlessly in front of me, a mosaic of dark channels and moss-choked trees. The world here didn't feel horizontal. It felt sinking, as if everything, even the sunlight, was being slowly pulled downward. My assignment was straightforward on paper. Evaluate ecological shifts in an isolated section known as Blackwater Marsh. Straightforward, but no one in the Baton Rouge field office volunteered to accompany me. Some avoided eye contact when the location was mentioned. Others mumbled excuses. One older technician simply said, "Blackwater remembers." When I asked what that meant, he walked away without another word. The road to the marsh faded quickly from gravel to mud, then from mud to something that barely counted as land. Cypress knees jutted out like bones, and the trees formed a canopy so dense it felt like twilight even in broad daylight. I launched my small aluminum boat into the water, its surface dark and still. Too still for a place with this many living things. The engine buzzed, breaking the heavy quiet. As I steered into the heart of the basin, I felt the world narrowing. The water channels meandered in unnatural straight lines, as if carved by unseen hands. Dragonflies hovered without moving their wings. Even the air tasted wrong. Earthy, metallic, almost stale. A few miles in, I saw the first sign that something was deeply off. A buoy, bright red, sitting alone in the middle of the marsh. But it wasn't drifting. It was anchored. Someone had placed it here intentionally. When my boat passed, I noticed faint scratch marks on its surface. Long, thin grooves, as if small fingers had clawed at it from every direction. I kept moving. I had to. My assignment required samples from the interior zone, and Blackwater Marsh was not a place you navigated twice. Still, the deeper I went, the heavier the silence became. Wetlands are usually alive with sound. Frogs, insects, birds, even the soft lap of water against roots. But here, nothing moved. The boat made ripples, but they didn't expand outward. They died almost instantly, absorbed into the stillness like the water didn't want them. That was when I felt the first wrongness. Not fear, not yet, but an instinctual tightening in my chest. Not because of what I heard, but because of what I didn't. I cut the engine and drifted. The marsh stared back, motionless, listening. And then, faintly, from somewhere behind me, tap, pause, tap, tap. 3 knocks, soft, wet, as if someone were tapping the underside of my boat with the tips of their fingers. I whipped around. Nothing. Only ripples, short-lived, unnatural. The sound didn't frighten me yet. It confused me. Maybe debris. Maybe water pressure shifting under the hull. Maybe tap, tap, tap. 3 again. Precise, rhythmic. The pattern was unmistakable. I turned the engine back on, hands trembling slightly, and accelerated deeper into the marsh. I told myself I imagined it, that my brain was filling silence with phantom noises. But the taps had been too intentional, too human. The marsh grew darker as I approached the zone marked on my map. Dense fog rolled low along the surface of the water, stretching in thin strands that looked almost like reaching arms. By the time I reached a stretch of old cypress trunks half submerged along the waterline, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Blackwater Marsh wasn't empty. Something here was watching me. Something small, something patient. And somewhere beneath the boat, something with tiny, curious hands. I anchored the boat near a cluster of sunken cypress roots and began setting up my first sample station. The water was dark, thick with tannins and silt, and my equipment barely pierced beneath the surface. Every reading felt muted, sluggish, like the marsh itself resisted being measured. I dipped a sensor probe into the water. No movement, no disturbance. I noted the viscosity, the pH, the temperature, everything within expected ranges. Except one thing. The conductivity reading fluctuated wildly, spiking as if something was passing near the probe. Something moving. I leaned closer to reset the device when it happened again. Tap. The sound vibrated softly through the aluminum hull. I looked up sharply. The water didn't ripple. Tap. Tap. Just like before. 3 knocks. Same pattern, same rhythm. I knelt beside the edge of the boat, leaning over carefully, trying to see beneath the surface. Nothing. Just still, black water reflecting the moss above. I held my breath and waited. The marsh around me was deathly silent. No insects, no birds, no wind. Only my heartbeat echoing between my ears. Then, the knocking shifted. Tap. Right beneath me. Tap. Near the bow. Tap. Directly behind me. 3 distinct locations. 3 precise taps. As if something circled the boat underwater. I felt sweat bead along my spine. Every instinct told me not to reach into the water, but training pushed me to investigate. I dipped a long-handled camera rig beneath the surface, angling it slowly, cautiously. The screen flickered with murky shapes, roots, debris, nothing unusual at first. Then, a sudden blur. Something darted past the lens, a small shape, quick, human-like, but too pale. I jerked the camera back. Water dripped from the lens, muddy and cold. I replayed the footage in slow motion, frame by frame, but the image was distorted, almost intentionally blurred, as if the marsh itself rejected being photographed. Still, I saw enough. A hand, small, thin. Fingers splayed against the lens for a single instant. I sat perfectly still, gripping the edge of the boat to steady myself. My breath grew shallow. Something brushed the underside of the boat, a soft drag, like fingertips trailing across metal. Then, a final knock. Tap, tap, tap. Longer pause between the second and third, like whoever, or whatever, was tapping was waiting for me to answer. I didn't. The fog thickened around me, swallowing my field of view. The silhouettes of twisted trees blurred. The air grew heavier, thicker. The marsh felt suddenly closer, leaning in, listening. Then, a splash. Small, delicate, like a foot stepping into water. I spun around, scanning the fog-drenched shoreline. Nothing moved. Nothing broke the surface again. But the splash hadn't come from the shore. It had come from right beside the boat. I forced myself to continue working, but my hands shook so badly that my notes became illegible scribbles. I managed to secure 1 water sample before deciding to relocate, if only to ease the crushing tension building inside my chest. I pulled up the anchor rope. Mud clung to it, and among the mud, 2 small fingerprints, perfectly pressed into the wet silt, side by side. That was the moment I finally understood. The knocking wasn't random. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't the hull shifting. It was communication. The marsh wasn't just observing me. It was trying to interact. And the children beneath the surface, they wanted me to know they were there. I camped that night on a patch of raised ground barely wide enough for my small tent. The marsh wrapped around the mound on all sides, turning it into a tiny island suspended above black, unmoving water. I kept the boat tethered nearby, its aluminum hull tapping occasionally against a root in a slow, hollow rhythm that made my skin crawl. By sunset, the fog had thickened into a pale wall that hid everything beyond the 20-foot radius. The air felt heavier than it should have. Dense with moisture, yes, but also with something unseen, something pressing, something waiting. As I cooked a small meal beside the tent, I tried to convince myself that the fingerprints on the anchor rope had been coincidence, the tapping a natural echo in the hollowed channels of the basin. But the marsh didn't let me lie to myself for long. It began with the absence of insects. No mosquitoes, no cicadas, no moths drawn to the lantern. Nothing. Just silence that settled over the island like a wet cloth. A silence too complete to be natural. I zipped myself inside the tent and turned off the lantern, trying to sleep despite the clinging humidity. For a long time, nothing happened. No sound, no movement. My mind drifted in and out of shallow dreams. Then, tap. Soft. Wet. I froze. The sound came from outside the tent, near the foot of my sleeping bag. I held my breath. Tap, tap. 3 knocks. Always 3. I waited, muscles locked, every nerve straining. My heart thudded, loud in the emptiness. So loud, I was afraid the marsh could hear it. Then something brushed the side of the tent. A gentle pressure. Small, horizontal, like a hand sliding across the fabric. I bit down to stop myself from shouting. The brushing moved upward, slow and deliberate, until it reached the tent's window mesh. I could hear moisture smearing against the fabric, tiny droplets soaking through. Then came the second sound. Breathing. Shallow, uneven, childlike, but wrong, like the breath of lungs filled with water. I reached silently for my flashlight, flicking it on in a burst, my hand trembling so badly the beam jittered across the tent wall. That's when I saw it. A handprint, pressed from the outside. Small, muddy, perfectly formed. 5 thin fingers splayed outward, each tapering longer than a normal child's would. The mud dripped slowly down the fabric, forming streaks that looked disturbingly like tears. The breathing stopped instantly. Silence again, heavy, expectant. Then another handprint appeared beside the first, and another. 3 in total, aligned in a row. As if 3 small figures stood side by side in the darkness, staring at the thin layer of fabric between us. I tried to speak, not out of courage, but desperation, a need to break the impossible stillness. But before a sound left my mouth, something pressed into the tent behind my head. Another hand. Cold, wet, flattening the fabric against my scalp. I lurched forward, heart hammering, as more handprints bloomed across the roof of the tent. Light, searching touches that mapped the surface like blind fingertips learning the shape of a new toy. And beneath it all, the knocking returned. Not on wood this time, but on the ground, circling the tent. Tap, tap, tap. Over and over, moving, encircling. The children weren't alone. Something larger moved in the water nearby, its presence unmistakable, its mass shifting the mud beneath the roots. A low vibration hummed through the island, rattling the stakes of my tent. The handprints began to fade then, slowly pulling away, leaving streaks of mud as they withdrew. The tapping softened, drifting back toward the water. By the time I unzipped the tent and flashed my light across the fog-soaked clearing, nothing remained. Except the prints. Dozens of them, pressed into the mud surrounding the tent, all facing inward, as if they had been watching me sleep. Morning came reluctantly, gray, muted, and cold. The fog didn't lift with the sunrise. Instead, it thickened, rising from the marsh like breath from a sleeping giant. I packed my equipment with shaking hands, pretending I hadn't spent the night listening to something tap and circle my tent like a child playing a cruel game. I couldn't stay on the island. I needed distance. I needed answers. The moment I stepped into the boat, the water around me went unnaturally still, like the marsh was waiting for me to move. I started the engine, but the sound felt swallowed before it reached the trees. I navigated forward slowly, eyes scanning the fog for any break, any sign of direction. The world had collapsed into a sphere no wider than 30 feet. Beyond that, only white, trembling mist. Half a mile in, I saw the first shape. A silhouette. Small, child-sized, standing barely above the waterline. At first, I thought it might be a stump, the kind that tricks your eyes in low visibility. But the shape didn't waver, didn't distort, didn't shift with the fog. It stood perfectly still. I flashed my light toward it. The beam illuminated nothing. The fog swallowed it whole. But the silhouette remained. Then, through the fog, another shape appeared beside it. Same size, same stillness. Then a third. 3 small silhouettes, aligned, watching. My hand tightened on the throttle, but I didn't accelerate. Something in my chest locked up, the same primal instinct that tells you not to step closer to a cliff in the dark. Instead, I drifted, slowly, silently. The fog coiled around the silhouettes until even their outlines blurred. I blinked, and they vanished. But the water rippled. Once. Directly beneath my boat. Not outward. Upward. I aimed the flashlight into the water. The beam dissolved into murk just inches from the surface. But the movement wasn't subtle. Something large slid beneath me, stirring the water with a deliberate, heavy grace. I cut the engine. A mistake, because without the noise, I heard it again. Breathing. Not above the water, but below it. Long, drawn-out exhalations that vibrated through the boat. Each breath pushed tiny bubbles up from the depths, breaking the surface in slow, rhythmic bursts. Then the fog thickened again, reshaping itself, condensing, darkening. And the silhouettes returned. Closer this time. So close I could almost distinguish features. Heads bowed slightly, arms hanging too long, legs too thin to support weight. But they didn't stand on land. They stood on the water. Their feet made no ripples. The marsh didn't react to them. Because the marsh knew them. My throat tightened. I tried to call out, to say anything, even if only to hear my own voice break the suffocating silence. Before I spoke, one of the silhouettes tilted its head. Slowly, curiously, listening. Another ripple surged under the boat, strong enough to rock it violently. Something massive brushed the hull from below, dragging along the metal with a dull, resonant scrape. The silhouettes didn't move. They didn't react. Instead, the fog behind them parted, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something rising beneath the water. A shape too big to comprehend, too shapeless to belong to anything living. A shadow stretching wider than the boat. The silhouettes turned their heads toward the rising form as if acknowledging it, as if welcoming it. I scrambled for the throttle, engines sputtering as I forced the boat away from the shapes. They didn't follow. They simply watched, their heads tilting in the same unnatural rhythm, like synchronized marionettes. When I turned back, the fog had swallowed them entirely. Only the breathing beneath the boat remained. Slow, deep, patient, following me. I don't remember exactly when I stopped trying to follow the map and started following the feeling. Logic told me to turn back, to find open water, to push toward the main channel and leave Blackwater behind. But each time I tried to steer away, the marsh itself seemed to correct my course. Subtle shifts in the current, invisible pulls in the water, narrow passages that closed with fallen branches the moment I passed them. I wasn't navigating the marsh anymore. The marsh was navigating me. Eventually, the trees opened into a shallow expanse where the water thinned into viscous mud. My boat scraped bottom and slid to a reluctant stop. Ahead of me, protruding from the muck, I saw it. The remains of a structure. At first, it looked like a tangle of rotted lumber, half swallowed by the earth. But as I stepped out of the boat and felt my boots sink into cold, sucking mud, the shape became clearer. 4 corners, collapsed walls, the faint outline of what had once been a raised wooden floor. A cabin. I stood where the front steps should have been, staring at the skeleton of what was left. The marsh had eaten most of it. Trees grew through the old foundation. Cypress knees pierced the boards like teeth. Moss dangled from whatever remained of the roof beams in wet, heavy strands. But there was something else. On the warped floorboards, visible through gaps in the collapsed structure, the mud was patterned. Not random, not natural. Footprints. Dozens of them. Small, bare. Tiny heels and splayed toes etched into the drying silt, frozen mid-motion. All of them led toward the same point. The edge of the floor where the wood gave way to open marsh. Toward the water. I stepped carefully onto the creaking boards, testing each one before shifting my weight. My heart hammered with every groan of old wood. The air felt thicker inside the ghost of the cabin, as if it held on to the breath of its last occupants. Kneeling to get a better look, I realized the footprints weren't aged by time the way the cabin was. They weren't softened or rounded by erosion. They were crisp, recent. I swallowed hard. The impression of toes, arches, even the faint hint of wrinkles in the skin had been left in the mud. Whoever had made them hadn't been wearing shoes, hadn't stepped lightly. There was desperation in the way some of the prints overlapped, clusters of small feet moving in the same direction at once. Running, away from something inside, or toward something outside. My eyes drifted to the far wall, if you could still call it a wall. Jagged planks leaned at odd angles, their surfaces scarred by long, thin scratches. Not from animals. Too straight, too deliberate. I traced one with my fingers. The wood splintered under my touch. Someone had clawed at this wall. Hard. A lot. The air cooled by several degrees. A faint sound, barely there, rose behind me. Not knocking this time. whispering. Not words, not even breath. Just the texture of sound, like air moving through small throats that no longer knew how to speak. I turned. For a moment, I thought the cabin was full. Shapes crowded the edges of my vision, small bodies huddled together, shoulders pressed close, heads tilted upward. Not solid, not opaque, just impressions in the fog, density where there should have been empty air. Children. Dozens of them. But when I focused, they vanished, dissolving into mist. Only the footprints remained. Only the scratches. Only the impression of their fear. I stepped to the edge of the broken floor, staring at the trail of small prints leading off into the mud. They ended abruptly at the waterline, as if the children had walked straight into the marsh and simply kept going. No splash marks, no drag lines, no struggle. Just a clean line where earth met water. I looked down at my own boots, half submerged in the muck, and realized my tracks mirrored theirs almost perfectly. Same direction, same path. Something in my chest twisted. This wasn't just a ruin. It was a memory. A preserved moment of escape or surrender, replayed whenever anyone dared come close enough to see it. Another breeze slid through the skeletal cabin, carrying with it a faint scent I hadn't noticed before. Not rot, not algae, not decay. Soap. Faint and old, like the ghost of washed linens in a house long abandoned. A home. This had been someone's home. The knocking started again then. Not around me, below me. 3 soft, wet taps on the underside of the floorboards. Tap, 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 tap. Directly beneath my feet. My legs nearly gave out. My mind raced with images, small hands reaching up through gaps in the wood, trying to grasp anything solid as water rose around them. Children hiding under the house, playing or escaping, or clinging to the last dry place as the flood swallowed their world. The marsh hadn't just taken the village. It had kept it. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The air went still. The footprints seemed sharper in the dim light, the path they drew clearer than ever. They led away from the cabin. They led deeper into the marsh. And despite everything in me begging to turn back, I stepped off the ruined floor and followed. Because by then, I understood something terrible. The children of Blackwater Marsh didn't want me to leave. They wanted me to see. I camped that night on a sliver of dry ground not far from the collapsed cabin. I didn't want to stay there. The place felt like a grave still trying to breathe. But the marsh was too shallow to navigate in the dark, and every instinct told me not to move blindly through fog thick enough to hide entire shapes. I pitched my tent, checked my equipment, and sat inside reviewing the day's footage. Most of it was useless. Fog distortion, overexposed reflections, brief glimmers of movement that vanished the moment I paused the frame. But one clip was different. From 1:37 p.m., hours before I reached the cabin. Taken automatically by my motion-triggered camera aboard the boat. It showed calm water, still, glossy. Then, just for a heartbeat, a small face breaking the surface. I nearly dropped the tablet. The face wasn't floating, wasn't breathing. It rose out of the water like a doll lifted by an invisible hand, eyes wide, unblinking, black as tar. Mud streaked its skin in hard lines like cracked paint. Its hair drifted around it like thin weeds. Then it sank straight down, perfectly vertical, without creating a ripple. I replayed the clip again and again, but the footage degraded every time, the pixels tearing as if the marsh itself was erasing the evidence. By the 10th replay, the image had collapsed into static. Still, I knew what I had seen. I tried to sleep, but the night pressed against the tent like a living thing. The humidity soaked through the fabric until every breath felt like drawing water instead of air. I drifted in and out of uneasy dreams. Then my watch vibrated on my wrist. 2:14 a.m. I hadn't set an alarm. The moment my eyes opened, I knew I wasn't alone. A faint glow pulsed through the tent, soft, white-blue, wavering like light seen through water. At first, I thought it was my lantern, but the lantern was off. The light came from outside. I unzipped the tent flap just an inch. Enough to see, not enough to be seen. At least, that's what I hoped. Fog swirled across the marsh clearing, illuminated by a pale radiance that had no clear source. And in the center of the glow, a child, standing ankle-deep in the mud, facing my tent. The same face from the video, gray, waterlogged. Eyes too large for the skull, reflecting the fog like polished stone. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stared. The glow intensified slightly, shimmering across its skin as if the light were coming from beneath it rather than around it. My throat tightened. My heartbeat thundered against my ribs. Yet the child made no sound, no motion. Until my watch vibrated again, 2:14 turning to 2:15. The child reacted as though the vibration itself were a signal. Its head tilted, slow and deliberate. Its arms extended outward, long fingers dripping with black marsh water. And then it smiled. Not widely, not unnaturally, just enough to show that the expression wasn't meant to resemble human comfort. It was recognition. The air shifted. A ripple formed around the child's feet, small, concentric circles that expanded outward across the mud and water, though nothing had moved to create them. Something else caused the ripple, something beneath. My breath caught as a shape stirred under the surface behind the child, a vast shadow rising slowly, like the swell of a great creature turning in deep water. The child stepped aside, not out of fear, out of obedience, as if making room. The ripple grew. A second pulse followed, then a third. 3 rhythmic surges, the same pattern as the knocking. The glow flickered, bending toward the unseen shape, illuminating its outline for only a fraction of a second. Huge, broad, wrong. A mass no child could cast, no tree could mimic, no animal could explain. Before I could comprehend it, the light dimmed. The fog thickened. The child's silhouette blurred and vanished. No splash, no footsteps, no retreat. Gone. The glow faded entirely, leaving me alone in suffocating darkness. But something remained. A handprint, pressed into the mud just outside my tent. Small, perfect, still wet. And beneath it, a deeper impression. 3 long grooves pressed into the earth, pointing directly to where the child had stood. A message, a marker, a direction. I didn't sleep again that night, because at 2:14 a.m., the marsh hadn't just shown me a child. It had shown me the one calling them. By the time dawn struggled through the fog, my nerves were frayed like wet rope. I broke camp with shaking hands and pushed the boat back into the water, desperate to leave the clearing where the child had appeared. But even as I drifted away, I felt eyes on me, dozens of them, hidden somewhere in the fog-drenched silence. As I navigated the narrow channels, the marsh seemed heavier than before. The air pressed down on me. The water moved sluggishly, resisting the engine like something thickened beneath the surface. Every sound I made felt amplified, but the marsh itself stayed quiet. Unnaturally quiet. After 20 minutes, the water beneath the boat began to darken. Not in color, Blackwater was always dark, but in depth. The mud thinned into a deep, slow-moving channel that hadn't been on any map. And then my boat drifted to a stop. Not gently, not gradually. Something stopped it. I throttled the engine. The propeller spun uselessly in protest. The boat didn't move. The water around me was perfectly still. Too still. I leaned over the edge and peered into the depths. Nothing. No roots, no branches, no debris. Just black water stretching into a void so complete it felt like staring into an open grave. Then, without warning, a ripple. Small, precise. It expanded outward in a perfect ring. Then another, and another. 3 pulses. The same pattern. Always the same pattern. The boat rocked slightly, a gentle sway, like something large had shifted beneath it. I grabbed my underwater camera rig, extended it over the side, and lowered it slowly. The screen flickered with static before stabilizing into the murk of the deep channel. At first, I saw nothing but drifting silt. Then the silt stopped drifting. It froze mid-motion, suspended, and the void beneath the boat pulsed. Just once. The camera feed distorted, shaking, tearing, pixelating. I steadied it, my breath caught in my throat. Something was rising, slowly, deliberately, without displacing the water around it. A shape began to break the darkness, too large to make sense, too broad to belong to any living thing in this marsh. Not a creature. Not exactly. More like a silhouette, a mass, a shadow with weight. But shadows don't rise. The camera trembled violently, the image warping as if the water itself resisted being filmed. And then, for a brief, horrifying moment, the distortion cleared enough for me to see details. A surface, pale and smooth, like skin left soaking too long. Stretched flat, impossibly wide. Then something moved across it. Tiny hands, dozens of them, pressing against the pale surface from below, leaving prints that distorted the shape, as though many small bodies were huddled beneath a thin membrane. One hand slid across the camera's view, small, gray, fingers too long. Another pressed beside it. Then another. I jerked the rig upward, but something held it beneath the surface. Not snagged, held. The boat tilted slightly, as if weight pressed upward from the depths. Then came a sound, not knocking, not whispering, but something worse. A dragging sound, long, slow, wet. Something pulled itself along the underside of the boat. The hull vibrated as the shape moved beneath me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I backed away instinctively, but the boat lurched, as if lifted. Not high, just an inch, but high enough to know the truth. Whatever was under the boat wasn't small. It wasn't curious. It wasn't just the children. It was the thing that owned them. A shadow passed beneath the surface, massive, blotting out the weak daylight filtering through the water. Then, a single eye opened. Not a human eye, not an animal eye, just a dark, perfect circle, reflecting nothing, consuming everything. It stared straight into the camera, as if looking through the lens and into me. The camera snapped in half. I stumbled backward. The boat lurched again, this time sinking slightly as though the shape were releasing it, letting it fall back onto the water. The ripples vanished instantly. The water returned to stillness, but something remained. A cluster of small bubbles rose to the surface, each one popping with the faint scent of rot. Then a final ripple, gentle, precise. A rhythm I couldn't mistake. Tap, tap, tap. From beneath. A reminder, a summons. And with it came a realization that cut through me. The children weren't following me. They were guiding me. Toward whatever lived beneath Blackwater Marsh. Whatever had claimed them. And now, whatever wanted me. I don't know how long I stared at the water after the eye vanished. Seconds, minutes. Time felt sluggish in Blackwater, stretching and folding like the currents beneath it. My hands shook so violently I could barely grip the edge of the boat. The engine sputtered once before catching, coughing thick exhaust into the fog. I didn't choose a direction. I fled in the only way flight existed here, blindly forward. The boat jerked, propelled more by fear than horsepower, carving a narrow path through the stagnant surface. My breath came in ragged bursts as I looked over the edge again and again, half expecting the pale mass to rise beneath me and flip the boat with a single effortless movement. But the water stayed still. Too still. As the fog parted in thin, shifting sheets, I noticed the trees had changed again. Their trunks leaned inward, converging above the water like ribs encasing a lung. Vines hung low, looping across branches like nooses. The air smelled different too. Less of rot and algae, more sweet, like overripe fruit, or decay masquerading as sweetness. I pushed forward, muscles burning as I steered between narrowing channels. The marshland thickened to either side, mud fields swallowing the water until the boat scraped bottom again. I had a choice. Wait for the thing beneath the water to return, or enter the mire on foot. The decision wasn't brave. It was survival. I leapt overboard into knee-deep mud that clung to my boots with a suction strong enough to hold me in place. Each step was a battle, pulling my legs upward against the marsh's grip. Behind me, the boat drifted slightly, just an inch, then stilled again, as if the water had claimed it. The fog swirled low across the mire, creeping between roots and trunks with purposeful slowness. I wrenched myself forward, trying to ignore the squelching pressure beneath my feet. But the mud wasn't just thick. It moved. Not constantly, not aggressively, just slightly, in little pulses, subtle shifting currents beneath the surface like muscles contracting under skin. I froze. Something brushed my calf, light, cold, and unmistakably shaped like fingers. I tore my leg free, stumbling forward onto a patch of firmer ground. My heartbeat roared in my ears. The fog around me vibrated with that barely audible whispering, the same tone that had filled the tent on my first night. Only now, it wasn't isolated. It came from everywhere. From the fog, from the trees, from the mud. The children were close. I saw movement, a figure darting between cypress trunks. Small, fast. Then another, and another, always just out of the corner of my vision, always vanishing when I turned my head. I forced myself onward, pushing through a curtain of moss that felt warm and damp like someone's breath. The forest opened into a wide flat of mud, a clearing, if you could call it that. The footprints were there, hundreds of them, small, bare, all oriented in the same direction, toward the far end of the clearing, toward a path that descended back into deeper water, toward whatever had risen beneath my boat. A tremor rippled beneath the mud, a long, low groan. almost like something massive shifting its weight. Then, the knocking began. Tap, tap, tap. But it wasn't beneath my feet now. It was all around me. In the trees, in the mud, in the air. The entire marsh was echoing with the rhythm. I broke into a run, tripping, clawing, dragging myself across the mire. My boots sucked down with each step until I abandoned them entirely, sprinting barefoot across the sticky earth. My foot sank into something soft, too soft, and I didn't dare look to see what it was. The knocking grew louder, closer, coordinated, not random signals. A call. Behind me, through the fog, I saw them. Dozens of childlike shapes rising from the mud. Some halfway submerged, some fully formed. All watching. Not chasing, not attacking. Just watching. Waiting for something else. The ground ahead sloped downward into a channel. Water pooled there, perfectly still, reflecting nothing but the pale sky above. I didn't want to enter it, but staying on land meant the marsh would eventually take me. I stepped into the channel. The cold clenched my legs instantly. And underneath the surface, movement. Not rushing, not violent, just rising. Slowly. The silhouettes behind me bent their heads in unison, as if bowing. The water at my shins churned. A dull, heavy pulse radiated upward through my bones. Boom. A second pulse. Boom. And a third. Not knocking this time. A heartbeat. Something waking. No, I whispered, but the word died in my throat. The mud under my feet shifted. The water darkened. A shape pushed upward, immense in the depths, its outline too wide to comprehend. I turned and fled, scrambling out of the channel, slipping on roots, choking on fog. I didn't stop running until the trees thinned and the distant glimmer of open water appeared beyond the reeds. I collapsed, heaving for air, tears mixing with sweat and grime. I had escaped the thing under the boat, escaped the children in the fog. But I knew the truth even then. I hadn't escaped Blackwater Marsh. I had only survived the part it wanted me to survive. For weeks after I escaped the marsh, I tried to convince myself that everything I'd seen, everything I'd heard, could be explained. Exhaustion, dehydration, hallucinations triggered by fungal spores, even mass psychogenic illness. I recited these explanations like mantras, just to quiet the memories. But the silence followed me. Not literal silence. No, that would have been easier. It was a breaking of silence. The faint echo of 3 taps in the quiet moments. The softest brush of breath in an empty hallway. A child's laugh on a windless night. Always distant, always subtle. Always enough to stop me mid-step and leave my heart hammering. I moved apartments 3 times. I changed my phone number. I threw away all my equipment, convinced something had clung to it from the marsh. None of it mattered. The marsh didn't need objects. It had a memory of me. It was nearly 3 months after the Blackwater incident that the package appeared on my doorstep. No return label, no postage stamps, no delivery slip. Just a small, damp cardboard box sitting neatly in front of my door, leaving a dark ring of moisture on the concrete. I felt cold the moment I saw it. Not fear, recognition. I lifted the box. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, something sloshed. No, it couldn't be. I set it on my kitchen counter, hands trembling violently. My stomach twisted with the familiar scent seeping through the cardboard. Blackwater. That same stagnant, suffocating smell of the marsh. I opened the lid. A glass jar sat inside, sealed tight with a rusted metal lid. The jar was filled with dark, nearly opaque water. Marsh water. My breath caught in my throat. At first, I thought the water was moving because my hands were shaking. But no, the movement was internal. Something drifted lazily inside the jar. Soft shapes, small, grayish. Fingers. Tiny, delicate fingers pressed against the inside of the glass, sliding slowly, leaving streaks of mud and algae across the surface. I dropped the jar. It thudded into the towel I'd laid beneath the box. Thank God I'd done that. And rolled slightly, leaving a trail of wet handprints across the counter. Because that's what they were now. Handprints. Dozens of them. Small, perfect, and unmistakably human. Pressed along the outside of the jar, as though something inside had been trying to climb out. I staggered back, hitting the wall hard enough to knock a picture frame loose. As I stared in horror, I noticed something taped to the underside of the jar lid. A piece of crumpled paper, smeared with mud. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. Childlike handwriting covered the surface, uneven and crooked, as if written by a hand that didn't know how to hold the pencil right. One sentence. Come back. We didn't finish. The letters grew darker toward the end, as if the pencil had been pressed harder, or as if something wet had smeared the graphite. My vision blurred. My heartbeat roared. I felt the room tilt. Then the tapping began. Soft, wet, inside my kitchen walls. Tap, tap, tap. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The taps were not external. They vibrated inside me, inside my bones. Something brushed against my ankle. I jerked my leg back. A small, wet footprint, appearing right where I'd been standing. Another formed, then a third, leading toward the living room. I backed away, every nerve in my body screaming. My apartment lights flickered, dimmed, and then stabilized. And in the reflection on my turned-off TV screen, I saw it. A child, standing behind me. Gray, waterlogged, unmoving. Black eyes reflecting the room like a void. I spun around. Nothing there. But the smell of the marsh filled my apartment. Thick, suffocating. I fell against the counter, gasping, struggling not to collapse. The jar had stopped moving, but the handprints on its surface were fresh, and new ones were forming. Slowly, deliberately, like something inside was waking up after a very long rest. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, because I finally understood the truth. I hadn't escaped Blackwater Marsh. I had brought it home with me. I started counting the knocks. That was how I tracked time after the package arrived. Not in hours or days, but in patterns. 3 taps in the kitchen wall. Pause. 3 under the bed. Pause. 3 at the window, even when I lived on the 4th floor. Always in pairs, always in sets, like moves in a game. I didn't go back to work. I barely left the apartment. The outside world felt thinner somehow, less real, as if everything beyond my door was just a film stretched over the surface of something deeper and darker. But inside was thick. The marsh had followed me. The scent of stagnant water lingered even when the windows were open and the fans were on full blast. My shoes left faint wet prints on dry tile. Condensation formed on surfaces that shouldn't sweat. Metal, plastic, glass. The jar sat on my table like an accusation. I thought about throwing it away, taking it to a river, a landfill, a furnace, anything. But some small, terrified part of me understood that trying to discard it wouldn't end this. It would escalate it. So I watched it instead. The water inside never settled. Not fully. Something moved at the edge of visibility. Small, pale shapes flickering in the depths like reflections that had nowhere else to go. On the 3rd night after the package arrived, the knocking changed. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Not pairs this time, sequences, code. I sat up slowly, throat dry, sweat clammy against my skin. The knocking came from the hallway. No, from beneath the hallway. From within the floorboards, as if the foundation itself had turned hollow. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and froze. A wet footprint waited on the floor just inches from where my feet would land. Small, perfect, pointing toward the open bedroom door. My chest tightened. My mouth flooded with the taste of marsh air. Another footprint appeared halfway across the room, then another by the doorframe. I rose carefully, avoiding the prints, knowing full well it didn't matter anymore. The apartment didn't belong to me now. It belonged to whatever could press itself into reality, one wet mark at a time. The hallway was dark. I didn't turn the light on. I knew somehow that they didn't need light, and turning it on felt like an intrusion into their space, not mine. The knocking continued. Tap, tap, tap. Slight pause. Tap, tap, tap. The sound led me to the living room. The TV screen was black, but my reflection wasn't alone. Behind me, faint, like a ghost burned into an old CRT, stood several small shapes. Children. Heads tilted, arms too long, eyes like dark glass. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I could feel them. My gaze slid to the table. The jar was empty. No water, no sediment, no fingers sliding along the glass. Just a ring of moisture on the wood and a single small object resting at the bottom. A smooth, rounded stone. Black, glossy, etched with 3 shallow, parallel lines. The knocks stopped. The silence that fell afterward was worse. Not because it was quiet, because it was expectant. I picked up the stone with trembling fingers. It was cold enough to burn, like holding a piece of the deep marsh that had never seen the surface. The moment I touched it, the world shifted. Not visually, not physically, but spatially. My apartment didn't feel like a room anymore. It felt like a thin, fragile shell wrapped around an endless space filled with dark, unmoving water. And from all directions, from the floor, the ceiling, the walls, the air, came a whisper. Not words, not breath, intent. You left. The thought wasn't voiced, but it was clear. A reprimand, an accusation, a statement. My throat closed, my chest burned. In the reflection of the TV, the children stepped closer. One of them reached out and pressed its hand flat against the back of my neck. I felt nothing on my skin, but inside, ice, pressure, depth. Images filled my mind, not memories, not mine. A village in the marsh, long before I was born. Children running between cabins built on stilts above hungry water. Laughter, games, dares. How long can you stand in the water? How far can you walk without sinking? Who's brave enough to follow the ripples? Then the flood. Not a storm surge, not a natural overflow, just rising. Water crawling up the stilts, licking at the floors, filling the gaps between boards. Parents shouting, children screaming, hands clawing at wood, little feet slipping on mud-slick planks, and beneath it all, knocking. From below. Not from trapped survivors, from something already there. Something that had been waiting under the village for a very long time. It didn't drown them. It took them. The images shattered, leaving me gasping on my knees in my living room, the black stone digging into my palm. Tears streamed down my face without me realizing. I understood the game now. It wasn't a game of chance. It wasn't a game of courage. It was a game of invitation. The children had been lured, enticed, called, and now they were doing the same. Through me. Tap, tap, tap. The sound began again, inside my skull this time. Come back. Finish it. See what we saw. The stone pulsed in my hand like a heartbeat. I stumbled to my feet, swaying. My vision blurred at the edges, replacing the pale walls of my apartment with cypress trunks and hanging moss. For one terrifying moment, my living room and Blackwater Marsh overlapped perfectly. My couch became a rotted cabin beam. My floor became slick boards over black water. My ceiling became fog. The children stood all around me now. Not reflections, not silhouettes. Present. Mud dripped from their hair. Their clothes clung like wet cloth. Their faces were soft and drowned. They watched me with absolute focus. Not pleading, not threatening. Waiting. The stone grew heavier, or maybe I grew weaker. Either way, I knew one thing. As long as I kept it, as long as I stayed away, they would keep knocking. On my walls, on my mind, on whatever thin barrier separated this place from theirs. And that barrier was wearing thin. So I made a choice. Not a brave one, not a smart one. Just the only one that might change the rules of the game. I packed a bag. I took the stone. I left the jar and the box behind. And I drove. Back toward Louisiana. Back toward the basin. Back toward Blackwater. Because this isn't a story about escape. It's about a place that refuses to be forgotten. About children who never stopped playing. About something beneath the water that will keep sending pieces of itself to my door until I eventually answer the only way that matters. By going back. I don't know what will happen when I return. I don't know if I'll come back again to tell anyone. But the knocking has stopped. For now. Not because Blackwater Marsh has released me. Because the game isn't unfinished anymore. It's just on pause. Waiting for me to step into the water again. And when I do, I know I won't be alone.